welcome, and thank you again for being the inspiration for these events. Um, so, is it okay to say the background idea to this while making it clear that
Sure,
it's not exactly the same? Yeah. So,
sure, go.
Michael, and I'm sure Bernardo does as well, received many emails with what might be incredible new breakthroughs, but given how much time he's spending on other existing projects, rarely has time to look through them. So the idea was somehow inspired by what in the US is called Shark Tank, or in the UK is called Dragon's Den, where people have a brief amount of time to propose some kind of business idea, and then existing people of industry get to assess it and then give some feedback on it. And in the TV show, they might invest in it. We thought it would be fun to do something similar, but there'll be no promise of any investment of time or money, but just a chance to discuss it or share your idea with Michael and Bernardo. And then the time was auctioned and was raising money for, or is raising money for Compassion in World Farming, which I understand to be the largest organization campaigning for better welfare for farm animals. It's close to my heart personally, having worked a little bit on a farm when I was younger and being quite horrified by how the animals were being treated. And it might be one of the most effective and quickest ways of reducing the suffering of literally millions, if not billions, of sentient beings. So, yeah, I'm very grateful for everyone that donated money. We've raised £1,555, which is a little bit more than that in US dollars. We'll have a maximum of 15 minutes to discuss any given ideas so that we can guarantee getting through at least six. But some we'll get through maybe a little bit quicker, and then we'll be able to do more than just six ideas. Is there anything else, Michael, Bernardo, you want to say before we go into the first question?
Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, thanks for doing this, and thank you to all of you for supporting this important cause, B, for trusting us with your ideas and wanting to discuss it. Yeah, like Amir said, I get tons of these every day, and by the way, I'm super glad that Bernardo is here because a lot of them are physics, even though I don't have a particular background in physics. So hopefully, if we have more of these, we'll figure them out together. But some of them are just completely beyond me. But I really, it pains me that I don't have time to look at any of them. And so, because I know firsthand what it's like to have something that is important that's very hard to get attention for. So, I think it's important for these kinds of things. And for another thing I'll say is that you don't necessarily need the two of us. So I say this to people sometimes. If you have get together with other people with some with other unconventional ideas and bounce them off each other, that's useful too. But anyway, so here we are, and I'm very happy to be able to do it.
I share the same feelings.
Brilliant. And Michael's obviously, well, both of you have had careers of um, I think the phrase in Buddhism is swimming upstream of the accepted views in current times, and have had considerable success in getting people to eventually take your ideas seriously. I don't know if you've written anything about it, Bernardo, but Michael, I'll put it in the chat. Michael wrote what I thought was a very inspiring piece, advice or lessons learned that he gives to his students
Oh yeah.
around navigating the ups and downs of being passionate about idea that other people might not be taking seriously yet. So yeah, just to emphasize again, even if it doesn't get much traction this evening, not to give up and to read that article for extra inspiration. Yeah, and with no further ado, Annemiek, I think you had so people could crowdsource, as in, so there were several people that donated towards Annemiek asking this first idea. So, and if someone isn't here to read their own question, then I will read it for them without promising to get any of the terminology pronounced correctly. But I think Annemiek is here and you can present your own idea.
Okay, yes, thank you for the opportunity. I'll just read my proposal then in one sentence and some more background. Is that okay?
Yeah, and if I can find you, I'll spotlight you. One sec.
Oh, no need to spotlight me.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead then.
I propose that quantum entanglement exists on a macro scale in our universe, and that we're unconsciously extracting information from this connection that influences our experience and behavior. And this all started with the open question how astrology works. The reason I thought about quantum entanglement was that it is the only way we could unconsciously react to the planets in our solar system since they're so far away. Forces like gravity or magnetism are too weak at large distances to have an influence on us. Since most quantum states are entangled and entanglement spreads, it's very likely it exists on a macro scale. The idea that living beings are using this connection to stay informed about their surroundings is the controversial part. If this is, however, true, it also means that we are connected with each other to such an extent that we unconsciously function as a collective. This collective experience and behavior explains the archetypes that developed in our collective unconscious, and also that manifestations in astrology can be events in which other people play a role. How quantum entanglements can explain the working of astrology, I will just quickly tell you about that, my ideas about that, is that we collectively and unconsciously sense the cycles of celestial bodies. We have created these meaningful archetypes of them through the ages of life's history. These archetypes, or collective patterns of prediction, are based on a combination of the physical characteristics of the planets and earthly experiences that can be associated with them. I'll quickly mention two examples. For instance, the huge planet Jupiter has unconsciously reminded our ancestors of abundance and prosperity, and it is therefore associated with these experiences. The sky blue planet Neptune has white cloud-like spots and has been fused with the archetype of the sky, the archetype being dissolving of boundaries, the divine, transcendence, compassion, and also imagination, since we have always looked up at the sky and seen images in the clouds. These archetypes having been formed, we now react to the positions of these planets accordingly, thereby creating self-fulfilling prophecy. Our connection through quantum entanglement also answers the questions how telepathy can work, which has been proven to exist by Rupert Sheldrake. It answers the question how we can get information about other places and times through dreams and visions, as Carl Gustav Jung has found out. And the question how in quantum mechanics different observers create a single shared reality, which was the problem that John Wheeler was struggling with. It's an explanation for near-death experiences. Through quantum entanglement, we could collectively give meaning to each other as entities, in such a way that we wouldn't function without this recognition. That the living collective enables these meaningful entities to continue to exist after death is not much more surprising than that it enables them to exist during their lifetime. And finally, this is a scientific theory for reincarnation, or in other words, memories from a prior life. Through quantum entanglement, information about an individual's experience could be conserved by the collective unconscious after death. From this, it can follow naturally that this information is accessed by a new individual at the moment of birth, absorbing the information from the collective unconscious that matches the positions of the celestial bodies at that time. Hence, we see the information about our prior life story in our birth charts. That indicates a karmic emotional imprint or memory in someone's life. Current scientific approaches to most of these questions are to ignore them. I get the impression that this bias is fueled by fear of the unconscious. Dr. Jung wrote in his book Dreams, "We have even forgotten that the psyche is by no means of our design, but is for the most part autonomous and unconscious. Consequently, the approach of the unconscious induces a panic fear in civilized people, not least on account of the menacing analogy to insanity." So I hope my theory is not too threatening. And since it provides a fitting answer to so many questions, I think it should be considered as a serious option. And I'm curious about your opinion.
Who should take this?
Maybe Bernardo, you go first, I think.
Okay. You seem to be trying to develop a physicalist account for NDE, reincarnation, telepathy, psi in general. In other words, You seem to be accepting physicalist premises that all causality is physical, and then trying to come up with a physicalist account for psi. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, you know, I'm not a physicalist. So I'm going to put a physicalist hat now to come closer to where you are. Quantum entanglement, there is a theorem in quantum information theory that, and it's been proven, it's not polemical, that demonstrates that you cannot transmit information through quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is not a causal process. In other words, when two elementary subatomic particles are entangled, the fact that they cannot be described independently of each other does not mean that one is causing the state of the other. It only means that there are no two particles. There is only one unified system. What we call the speed of light limit in physics, famously proposed by Einstein, is actually the speed of causality. Light is the fastest, follows the fastest causal path there is. So because quantum entanglement seems to ignore the speed of causality, what this actually means is that it's not a causal process. There isn't a cause arising on one side and being transmitted through a causal chain to an effect somewhere else. From that perspective, under physicalism, we cannot say that the position of the sun or the planets causes our mood or events in our life through quantum entanglement, because no causality is transmitted through quantum entanglement. Let me give you an analogy so you understand how quantum entanglement is seen in physics. If you have, suppose you have two cameras in your living room, and your cat is walking around in your living room, and the cameras are in different positions. The two images will be entirely correlated, right? If one side, the cat is walking to the left, the cat is walking to the right on the other image, because it's the same cat. It's not that the cat on the left is causing the movement of the cat on the right. It is that there are no two cats. There is only one cat seen through different perspectives. Quantum entanglement is exactly like that. It's not that one cat / planet is causing an effect on you / another person. It is that whatever is entangled is one system, perceived or measured through different perspectives. So because of this no information transmission theory, which is not polemical, I don't think fundamentally quantum entanglement can be used as a causal process. It's not how it's defined. It's not what we call entanglement. Even if it could, you would have other difficulties, which is that why am I entangled with Mars? Now, the argument for that would be if Big Bang theory is correct, and there are reasons to think it's not, but it's the most popular theory today. If it is correct, then everything was entangled with everything else at some point in time, and we know of no fundamental process in physics that collapses any wave function. We can only talk about collapse as an operational idea, because if you have an entangled microscopic system under observation, you're measuring an interference pattern, for instance. Once you make a measurement of the system, the interference disappears. But that only works if you already presuppose that the environment that makes the measurement is classical. If everything is in a quantum superposition, then nothing can cause collapse. There is no coherent theoretical model for that. And that's the reason why it can be coherently said today that everything is entangled with everything else, since we know of nothing in the history of the universe since the Big Bang that could have broken that superposition. Yet we see a classical world. So I think if quantum entanglement were a causal process, you would have a case, but you would also have a difficulty, which is the difficulty that we all face, which is how did it become classical? Why do we perceive one possibility when all theory tells us that every quantum interaction just creates a new superposition and doesn't destroy any superposition? How come we have a classical environment that allows for decoherence? In other words, the leakage of the information related to the superposition into a classical environment. So you would have that problem, but everybody else would have that problem. So nobody could shoot you on that account because they would be having the same problem. I think the real problem that you would face is the intuition that entanglement is a causal process or an information transmission process, which it isn't. It isn't that. Now I'll play in your favor. Now I'll say, what is the best way I could interpret what you said to make it hold? One could argue in a way that is coherent with entanglement that it's not like the planets are causing what happens in your life. No, it's just that both the movement of the planets and the events of your life are both governed by the same underlying archetypes. Therefore, you get a clue about your life by observing the planet in the same way that you get a clue about how you look when you look in the mirror. The image in the mirror is not causing the way you look. It's just a way to collect information about how you look. In more or less the same sense, you could say the patterns, the ebb and flow of the planets in the solar system, they are like a mirror image. They correlate with the intrinsic templates of our life. So if we look at them, we get a clue about what's happening here. Because they may be all fundamentally entangled in a way that we don't really understand because they seem to be classical, but fundamentally they may be entangled. And if they are, then the templates of unfolding, the organizing principles that govern their movements are the same organizing principles that govern our lives. And therefore, looking at one gives you a clue about the other, even though there is no information flowing between the two and no causal link between the two. In that sense, you could have astrology a la Richard Tarnan's, which is the celestial patterns are clues, they are templates. They're not causal. They are a map. They give you a map because we have this broad perspective on the celestial bodies and such a localized perspective into our own lives that by looking at the celestial bodies, that's the intuition underlying the theory, you could be actually looking at a map of life and getting some clues from that. Again, there is no causal link between the map and your life, as there is no causal link between the image in the mirror and the way you look. One is not the image in the mirror is not changing the way you look. It's not causing you to look different, just mirroring that back to you. So the celestial bodies could be a mirror for life. They mirror life back to us in a way that may make it easier to identify certain trends and patterns. And that is the original intuition that would indeed hold water. Whether it's true or not, it's a different question. Well, what reasons do we have to believe that? That's a different question. But fundamentally, in terms of principles, one could not shoot that down immediately. That somehow the organizing principles of nature are such that they are fractal, that they apply equally at multiple levels of complexity, and therefore the dynamics of the celestial bodies tell us something about the microdynamics of life. And we could use that as a map or a mirror of some sort. That you could do. In principle.
So we've got thanks, Bernardo, brilliant answer. We've got maximum 2 more minutes on this. Sorry, there seems to be a problem with my video. But we've got a maximum of 2 more minutes on this question. So I don't know if Michael, you have anything to add?
Let's see, just 2 things. I agree with Bernardo on all of that, and in particular, I don't really know anything about astrology, but my understanding of it was that it really wasn't about the planets per se. In other words, I think here's a hypothesis. I think what they were getting at are generic patterns in behavior in large scale things like course of life, behavioral propensities, things like that, that are patterns that they wanted to draw attention to. And they're only mapped onto the planets as a kind of study aid. I'm not actually sure it has anything to do with the physical things that we see through a telescope. I think this is an attempt to map out a kind of, as Bernardo was saying, it's a map. It's a kind of classification or a map of patterns that whoever came up with it wanted people to be aware of. That's kind of my guess. And then the only other thing I would say is and this goes for almost any of these kinds of proposals, I think it's important to think about what sort of observation or evidence or anything that you could gather that would make you give it up, right? I think that's like that's a really useful study aid for any of these things. Like it's an interesting idea. Now the question is, what would you ask yourself? What would I have to see to make me think, man, this is not going anywhere? I don't know. I don't know what that would be, but it's something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Bernardo. Yeah, great opening idea. Okay, the next idea, it was requested that I read it. So apologies in advance, because I'll sometimes be reading, including this one, ideas that I don't necessarily understand. So I'll also just try. Unfortunately, there's a character limit on the chat and how much you can post in one go. So I don't know if anyone actually could volunteer. It's the second question on microtubules. I'll post the first paragraph, but then if anyone can post the next ones as I read, it might be easier for Michael and Bernardo and others to actually read it. But I'll go ahead and read it for the benefit, at least, of the recording, and also just start a timer for this question. Okay, so this one is from Anish. It's raised £200, so thank you so much. The title is Microtubule Quantum Phenomena as a Substrate for Cognition in Self-Organizing Collectives of Cell Systems from the Simple to the Complex. Okay, so the intro is microtubules, long recognized for their critical role in cell division, intracellular transport, and cytoskeletal integrity, have recently been implicated in cognitive and consciousness-related processes at various scales, from single-cell organisms to complex mammalian systems. This proposal builds upon the emerging hypothesis that the quantum properties of microtubules, particularly their photonic and quantum coherence feature, may underlie fundamental aspects of cognition and self-organization in biological systems. Studies on organisms ranging from Paramecium to rodents have shown that volatile anesthetics can reversibly abolish behavioral responsiveness. One of the putative molecular targets for these anesthetics is the neuronal microtubule cytoskeleton. In more complex systems, microtubule stabilizing agents have been found to delay anesthesia-induced unconsciousness, highlighting the possibility that microtubules are functionally linked to consciousness. Also, superradiant properties of the tryptophan networks in cytoskeletal structures, particularly microtubules, suggest a quantum-based capacity for photonic collective excitation and signaling. Furthermore, the structural role played by centrioles in cellular organization and their interactions with microtubules are increasingly studied for the potential influence on cognition in both naturally occurring systems and engineered anthrobots, living motile biobots derived from human somatic cells. These considerations lay the groundwork for investigating microtubule quantum phenomena as a unifying substrate underpinning cognition and self-organization in diverse living collectives, from single cells up through multicellular constructs like anthrobots and eventually entire neuronal systems. So the rationale and significance is the presence of large-scale tryptophan meganetworks capable of superradiance in the ultraviolet regime has been experimentally and theoretically supported. Such quantum coherence phenomena may influence or even drive complex signaling states relevant to higher-order processes like learning, memory, or problem-solving in both single cells and neural networks. Research conducted by Anirban Bandyopandey, in which his lab created a nanobrain as a time crystal, has shown that resonant bands, triplet of triplet peaks, are observed in microtubules, tubulins, and actins at various frequencies. Role in anesthetic mechanisms and consciousness. Recent evidence shows that microtubule stabilizing drugs, e.g. epithylline B, slow the onset of anesthesia, suggesting that microtubules are not merely structural scaffolds, but active participants in consciousness-related processes. This stands in line with long-standing theories that treat microtubules as targets for anesthetic gases. Centrioles and cellular cognition. Mother centrioles serve as instructive hubs that define cell geometry and polarity and interact directly with microtubules. Studies on cilia and centrosomes highlight their roles in sensory and signaling capabilities at the single cell level. These findings dovetail with the notion that subcellular structures can manifest cognitive-like behavior, especially in bioengineered contexts such as anthrobots. Emergent cognition in bioengineered collectives. This self-constructing multicellular biobots made from human somatic cells exhibit cilia-based locomotion, morphological plasticity, and self-organization, properties potentially correlated with the cytoskeleton and centriole structures. Harnessing their microtubule quantum properties may provide insights into how cognition arises spontaneously in multiscale biological collectives. By systematically studying how microtubule quantum phenomena manifest in systems ranging from single-celled planaria fragments to anthrobot collectives and mammalian neurons, we may identify fundamental principles that unify cellular cognition with higher-level consciousness. So the hypothesis: quantum phenomena in microtubules, specifically the capacity for photonic superradiance, resonant bands, and anesthetic interaction, constitute a unifying substrate for cognition, enabling self-organizing behaviors across biological scales from simple cell organisms to complex engineered anthrobot collectives.
Marco, do you want to give it a crack first?
Sure, I'll try it. Let's see. Overall, I actually like it a lot. Couple of interesting things, though. One is that we have to think about whether the claim is that the microtubules are necessary and or sufficient. So it's entirely possible that disruption of microtubule structures would abolish the things that we know how to measure, that we use as proxies of consciousness. Another such thing, which actually is also a target of volatile anesthetics, is gap junction communication. So the electrical communication between neurons. So we use these compounds all the time to break electrical networks into individual cells, and it's not obvious to me which one of those is the more correlated with consciousness. So we have to ask ourselves if the microtubules are necessary for observing the correlates of consciousness, or if you think they're sufficient for producing it. If you think they're sufficient for producing it, then there's other interesting model systems. For example, there are cell-free cytoskeletal systems. So you can organize, and cell biologists who study cytoskeleton do this a lot. You can have a bulk solution, let's say a mil or more of just free solution, no cells, no other components, just a free solution with a bunch of cytoskeletal proteins, and you can nucleate it, and you'll get some microtubules forming, and some other structures and so on. And so then we have to have a theory of what do we think is going on there. It's completely synthetic. It's not a cell or anything like that. What would be the experience of a system like that? Another thing to think about is whether and I know I think Stu Hameroff thinks this. I'm not sure, but other people certainly do that the microtubules are uniquely required for consciousness. That they're like this kind of the only structure that can do it, and that raises a different set of questions, which is if there is different kinds of life out there in the universe somewhere, and you were to encounter some that otherwise gave evidence for, let's say, you had a nice conversation with it, and you felt otherwise that this was a mind of some sort, would you assume that the only conscious life in the universe is microtubule based, or would there be other ways to do it? And I guess the final thing I'd say is that it's really difficult, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but it's really difficult to dissect the contributions of the quantum properties of microtubules from their classical properties, because they do all kinds of interesting things that are well described by classical physics that may well be critical for consciousness, or at least for us to observe consciousness. And I don't know how you would experimentally distinguish. I think that's the hard part, right? You want to experimentally distinguish, is it all this kind of standard things that the microtubules are doing that are important, or is it the quantum coherence and all of that? I don't know. Do you know, Bernardo, how could we distinguish those?
Well, the paper alluded to could distinguish an effect that can only be made sense of if there are superposition states in the microtubule that go almost to macro scales.
That's cool.
So that would have to be a quantum effect. We don't have any classical way to account for those observations. Of course, it has to be repeated. You know, the jury is still out. But if it is repeated and confirmed and replicated, then I think yes, you would have to admit that there are superposition states across microtubules at a scale that we don't see otherwise. In other words, it's almost macroscopic, and that they can maintain the superposition states in the wet, moist environment of the brain. It would be the key leap. We would have an account for how the brain could actually be a quantum computer, so to say.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, if true, I think the implications of that kind of thing is that a wide range of synthetic devices ought to be possible then that have some of these properties, and then we would have to know what we're going to say about the, you know.
Personally, I don't think orchestrated objective reduction, which is the theory in question put forward by Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose decades ago, I don't think it can account for consciousness under physicalist premises. Even if the brain has quantum processes, well, you know, a leaf has quantum processes. Quantum processes happen all the time. So that fact alone, that you could have coherent states in the brain at large scales, it doesn't really do anything to reduce qualities to quantities. You're still facing the hard problem of consciousness, the explanatory gap. One critique of Sir Roger when he put this forward first was that the motivation there was to say, look, we have a mystery here, it's quantum entanglement, and we have another mystery, it's consciousness, so they must have something to do with each other. Well, that's not enough. One would have to, under physicalist premises, to propose a causal mechanism by means of which you go from atomic or molecular dynamics to experiential qualitative states, and that has not been proposed. In the original theory, even collapse of the superposition state, which Sir Roger calls a moment of consciousness, that link is entirely arbitrary. Why would the collapse of this coherent state be a moment of consciousness? There is no explicit causal bridge between the two sides. But in Sir Roger's original formulation, the collapse is not caused by consciousness. It causes consciousness. What causes the collapse itself is objective reduction. It's when the mass entailed, or the amount of mass or energy entailed in the system crosses a certain threshold, that it spontaneously collapses in one of the myriad possibilities within the probability wave. Stewart, I think, the latest Stewart, I don't think he's married to this idea of objective collapse. I think he sees things differently. He uses the Skyrook idea, which is that it's a dualist view, which is that consciousness is there, but it has to interface with the physical world somehow, and that interfacing operates through the collapse of the coherent state across microtubules. So the collapse is not creating consciousness, it's the causal link between a realm of consciousness and the physical realm. And there may even be a third realm entailed, which is the realm of Platonic values, as Sir Roger and Stewart put it. So it may even be a sort of a trialist approach. I don't think I could say, I don't think it works as a reductive approach to consciousness, from consciousness to physicality. But the correct way to say is that it doesn't even have an account, a tentative account for that. So we can't even say that it doesn't work, because to say that it doesn't work, you have to have an explicit account. But it doesn't even do that. It simply links the fact that there may be these coherent states in the brain at scales larger than we thought, it links the collapse of that coherent state to a moment of consciousness. But why that link? It's rather arbitrary so far.
I think Anish might be here. So if you wanted to, we've got 2 minutes max left on this question. If you wanted to respond in some way briefly, you can.
Oh yeah, sure. So this was something I was thinking about in terms of just being able to say that specifically the centrioles in cells, the work that Michael Levin has been doing, we could show that anesthesia has the same effects that it does on humans at the full, complex organism level, and just start there, right? I mean, it's not like we're saying that this is exactly how it works. We're saying that, okay, we can map something here from the single cell all the way up to, a complex, the most complex biological system in the planet, which is a human, right? So that's my point, is just say, yes, we can do this, and then move forward from there.
There is one guy, Federico Fagin. The core of his theory is that what we call quantum coherent states and superposition states, they are our model of pure consciousness. In other words, it's not like superposition states cause consciousness. No, they are the way we describe a conscious state. And what we call classical states are the symbols put out by conscious states. In other words, appearances. So it eventually goes back to idealism. But from that perspective, anything that holds a coherent quantum state over a large scale is a candidate for something that has a sort of dissociated, a private conscious inner life of its own. Biological organisms clearly have that. Microtubules are found in single cells, but classical computers don't. So the idea one could entertain is if the key difference are these lattice structures in the microtubules that somehow can maintain the coherence across large scales. If that is the key, can we artificially design them and induce an artificial dissociation in the mind of nature under analytic idealism? I think that is a viable avenue of speculation. Quantum computers would still not qualify. They don't have those lattice structures. Each qubit is maintaining complete isolation. But it could point the way to design something more sophisticated, for which we might have better reasons than we have today to say that an artificial thing may have a subjective point of view of its own.
And I think that
I'm so sorry to cut you short, because it looks like a really fruitful conversation. Potentially there might be time at the end if we get through the other questions, but just to be fair on everyone, I'm going to have to move this along.
Okay.
But thank you, that was really great. And do feel free to follow up with a comment in the chat, and it might get read by Michael or Bernardo. And also just to say to you and to everyone, we have a weekly Q&A now with Bernardo. So I don't know what other opportunities there are to interface with Michael, but there is now a weekly potential opportunity themed with Bernardo. So bear that in mind as well. The next idea is submitted by Stephen Jarosek. It says to be read by me if Stephen can't make it, but I think I see you, Stephen, in the list of attendees.
I'm good.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and read it yourself.
Hi, Michael and Bernardo.
Hi,
I'm an engineer and business consultant who's done a bit of research in semiotic theory, so I'm interested in the semiotic theory of Charles Sanders Peirce. So I'm coming outside the square. My question revolves around association as a fundamental principle. Well, the question is directed mainly at Bernardo, because he's done work in my area. It also involves you too, Michael, because we're both interested in the same sort of thing, agency theory. So it's related. But I direct my question mainly to Bernardo because my main conjecture is Bernardo, you identify consciousness within the quantum field, but you leave its mentalism unspecified. My conjecture is that association, semiotic theory association, must play an integral part in its mentalism. But you leave mentalism undefined. You've published 2 articles that revolve directly around what I'm interested in. And okay, in your article of February 2012 titled Evolution, Self-Directed Neuroplasticity and Quantum Entanglement, you refrain from openly supporting this synthesis, the synthesis being evolution with neuroplasticity with quantum mechanics. However, you haven't written it off either. You support it, saying what I'm saying is that there is enough scientific substance behind both hypotheses that they should be taken very seriously, and that there are strong rational reasons to link these hypotheses to evolutionary biology. So you support it in part, though not enthusiastically. What I would appreciate your opinion on is, if we were to incorporate association as a top-down principle, can you be persuaded to change your mind to become more enthusiastic about your thesis?
I'm not sure I understand the idea. You're talking about semiotics, the science of meaning.
That's right.
How would you link that to dissociation?
Okay. You do mention dissociation in your work, and it appears, and my perspective is a bit different, which I've mentioned before. I guess, I mean, my perspective is association, yours is dissociation. What I'm saying is, if we incorporate association, as you can think of it in terms of the opposite to dissociation. So it's semiotic association as opposed to dissociation. I'm coming from outside your field. What I'm suggesting is to shift your perspective entirely and see if you can think of everything in terms of association, the semiotic principle.
Yeah, I understand it now. Well, I think that brings us closer to Michael's own view. One difference Michael and I have is that I tend to put a lot more emphasis on life as a unique, unified process. In other words, we start from the whole, and we get to living organism. And Michael sees that coming more from the bottom up, if I understand Michael correctly. So he sees these associations as validly leading to coherent, higher structures of life. I think the bridge is, to me, is integrated information theory. I see life as this actively enforced dissociation. I don't think anything else qualifies out there as actively enforced dissociation. I don't think the sun is an actively enforced dissociation. I think life is organisms with a membrane that works as a Markov blanket that separates them from the environment. In other words, you start from an archeon and you get to a human being. It's all life. All of them are the representation or the image, the appearance of an actively enforced dissociative process. But there are other dissociative processes that are spontaneous and not actively enforced. And we know that from integrated information theory. If a complex grows too large, it will integrate more information by shedding off parts of itself. It will spontaneously dissociate, but that dissociation is not actively enforced. And we are full of internal dissociations. I'm dissociated from the mental process that appears to observation as my liver or my kidney. I don't beat my heart deliberately. My reporting metacognitive ego is dissociated from a lot of stuff that is within the actively enforced dissociative boundary that defines my being as a living organism. And according to IIT, you would have this spontaneously dissociated ontological dust making up the inner life of the inanimate universe. It wouldn't be dust that is actively dissociated from other particles of dust, but it would still be spontaneously dissociated. And they could then connect and join through links of meaning, which you could say that's a semiotic dynamics. Yes, I think that is valid, perhaps even required, because an association is a cognitive bridge, and a cognitive bridge is a link of meaning. It's part and parcel of how mind operates through links of meaning. An inflated air balloon makes you think of your birthday party because there is a semiotic link between the two. There's a link of meaning. You've seen these two things occur in correlation. You establish a link of meaning. One starts meaning the other. So from the point of view of IIT, although I still hold strong to my notion that life is a unique thing because it's an actively enforced dissociated boundary, I grant, because of my understanding of IIT today, which is better than it was 8 years ago, that there are these spontaneously dissociated complexes forming the ontological dust that is the fabric of the inanimate universe, and there may even be ontological dust within us. And I grant that dust particles, which are micro complexes of information integration, may join together and become associated, and those may become even more associated in a snowball effect because of the dynamics of information integration as given by IIT. I accept that that may happen, and I accept that fundamentally, from the perspective of the noumenal, that is a semiotic process. But I'm sure Michael can add a lot more to this and maybe contradict some of what I said.
Yeah, there's a lot that Michael says that resonates with my own thinking, particularly from the perspective of agency theory. So yeah, I think I probably do share more common ground with Michael. What do you have to say, Michael?
Yeah, well, the only thing I think the only thing I can say is relative to what Bernardo just said. So we've actually been applying some of those IIT metrics to all kinds of weird stuff. Some of it weird aspects of life, and some of it to I think what you would call non-life. And I'm not going to make any claims until it's peer reviewed and out, because I want the experts to make sure that we actually did the calculations correctly and all that good stuff. But I think it will be interesting. I think if you like the kind of thing that the integrated information theory is measuring, we have some cool surprises coming. And I think it's not like I don't believe that life is an interesting thing. It's just I think that we call life those things that are very good at doing exactly what you just described. But I do see it more as more of a continuum, and I think we can and I think in nature there are very minimal versions of this where we just have to say, it's an example of it. It's not a great example, but it's doing some of the things that we see life doing. So yeah, we'll see. I'll be very interested to see actually when some of our stuff is out, what you make of it.
No, I'm very curious. I'm not in the review board of these. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I'm coming from a very different perspective, and I'm also interested in extending this idea to quantum physics. And I know, Michael, that quantum physics isn't your specialty, but no, it is yours though. And what I'm thinking of is extending this idea of association to the Feynman diagrams. Have you heard of any such a thing?
Of course, it's the bread and butter of quantum field theory. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, my thinking is to extend this idea of association as top-down causation to the quantum domain. And any thoughts on that?
There is essentially no integrated information in the particle interactions that are modeled by Feynman diagrams. It's minimal. It's very close to nothing. So no, I wouldn't go that far. No.
Okay, I've got a lot more to cover, but it's so broad, scattergun, that perhaps we should leave it there then, unless you have anything more to add.
The interactions that are modeled in a Feynman diagram are not self-sustaining. They happen, energy is exchanged, and then it's over. And literally, well, not literally, it's much faster than the blink of an eye. These are very ephemeral interactions. They don't really integrate information to any reasonable degree. You're better off looking at gluon exchanges within baryons, within a proton, for instance, and looking at the dynamics of the 3 quarks within a proton and how they exchange force-carrying virtual particles. And you may find more information integration there, but that's at a level, it's not one interaction in one Feynman diagram. It's a whole host of them producing a sort of self-reinforced stable structure, which is what creates most inertial mass, by the way. It's not the Higgs mechanism. Never mind. It's you're better off looking at that, those stable interactions through force-carrying virtual particles within baryons or other composite subatomic particles.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. You're a member of the weekly group, aren't you? So
Yes, I am.
you might be able to continue or slip your updates with this as we go along.
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And again, thank you, Michael and Bernardo, for such considered responses. Anas has the next question. Are you happy for me to spotlight you and you can read it?
Oh, I can read. I can explain my
Brilliant.
general idea. The idea I had was basically when I was trying to simulate EEG signals, and I learned certain properties that they have, which were very interesting, like that they were fractal, that they were nested, and they had like some very long range interactions. And like they displayed self-similarity across many scales. And if you plot the log frequency with the log power, you get this nice line. So for me, this was very interesting because I didn't find any model that could capture this. And I started to look at what can be done with calculus in fractal geometry. And that's when I discovered theories like scale relativity by this physicist called Laurent Notal. And the idea is when you have a system that is fractal, that is very rugged, it's like you cannot define derivatives, you cannot define calculus, but there are ways to get around this. And the way to get around this is by introducing complex numbers and introducing complex calculus. And these kind of systems, trajectory in these kind of systems resembles a lot a Feynman path integral, where the particle takes all the possible paths at the same time. So it acts like a wave. And that was very interesting because essentially you can either do it through what he did, or you can use Ito calculus. I've seen approaches doing that. But you can get a Schrodinger equation for that classical system. You have a classical system, but is multi-scale and fractal, and it can be modeled by a wave function that follows the same thing as a Schrodinger equation, which was interesting because that means that given proper boundary condition, I have a superposition of states and quantized vibration mode, which is basically what the EEG spectra is. So you have alpha, you have beta, and you have gamma oscillations, etc. And they're nested inside each other. And it was like pointer states in quantum mechanics, where you have these states that resist the coherence and they persist. And these pointer states, they can phase lock with the environment. When we're doing a task, for example, and it's boring, it shows in the EEG, and time tends to flow slowly. Basically, the time perception is impacted by the state we're in, etc. And not only that, but they seem to be a universal syntax. Like memory, it's almost like a holographic memory that they get imprinted in the cortex, and they become the memory states because they interact with the rest of the environment. And you could also derive something called a Bohmian quantum potential from David Bohm's version of quantum mechanics, which is a Laplacian of the probability distribution of the wave function. Basically, it forces all the modes to be very sharp and very distinct. It prevents them from mode mixing. So you have a classical system that follows the math of quantum mechanics. And I found that very interesting. It worked in my simulations. And I thought, well, This is interesting because it probably does the same thing in these salamanders and these self-regenerating creatures, where very likely it is also something like that. It's a superposition of many states, and you have like a hologram that's encoded in the wave function, and this Bohmian quantum potential is running all the time. It's self-sustaining, this organism. If you cut its arm, it's gonna be compelled to grow it again until that term becomes zero, essentially. And you don't need, I found this idea to be very interesting because I think I've read, for example, a paper about the Hydra, for example, and how it maintains bioelectric gradients. And you have an immortal Hydra and a mortal one. And the only difference is that these gradients between, for example, the head and the feet, they're maintained at very sharp difference. And the other one, they're not. They're sort of like decohere. They don't have the software layer is still there. It's still in this quantum-like wave function, but the physical process that's going to force these states to maintain their coherence somehow disappears when it's put in cold water. And that was something else that I understood. And one third point that I was thinking about that I wanted to share was the sometimes you have these exotic behaviors of some components in a biological system, like the mitochondria. You have like tunneling effects, or you have microtubules, for example. They exhibit coherence, etc. But when you take them outside the cell, do they continue to exhibit these things? For example, you take the microtubule, or you take the cytochrome C oxidase, or and you just put it in a salinated solution, and then you try to stimulate it. A lot of the times they don't continue to have that behavior. They're only quantum when they're inside that bigger system that has a bigger wave function that is quantized. And so for me, if this is true, can we, for example, design bioelectric fields based on these Bohmian quantum potentials and, essentially restore coherence if it starts to degrade? That was my general thinking. And you don't need quantum components for a system to exhibit quantum behavior. It just has to be fractal and multi-scaled. Yeah, that's the sort of conclusion.
Yeah, interesting. Well, a couple of things. One is that there are many different cell types, tissue types, and so on in the body that are generating signals that you could analyze this way. They have a different overall time scale. They're not as fast as EEGs, but there's a ton of bioelectrical activity going on in every cell of the body, basically. So in theory, if you have a computational pipeline that you can apply to data like that, we can send you some data that we have, and I think other people probably have some as well at this point from bioelectric measurements. So you could analyze it. We are paying a lot of attention to, in particular, so that Hydra paper that you were talking about, it's still a preprint from our group. It hasn't been published yet, but in other contexts, we are paying a lot of attention to the properties of the bioelectric states in terms of health, disease, aging. In particular, aging. We've done a few things. There's a couple of preprints coming shortly on aging and kind of a new theory of aging. And we are thinking hard about the question of what do you want to do to the pattern to promote longevity and inhibit or even reverse aging, and also for other contexts such as birth defects, regenerative repair of accidents and so on, of injuries and so on. There are a number of ways that we've thought about reinforcing the normal patterns, extending them. But yeah, there are correlations on many different timescales, and we don't know yet which ones are critical. I will. The only thing I can say about the quantum stuff is that I'll just describe quickly one example that we have, and I'm not saying it has anything to do with quantum anything, but it has an interesting property that's kind of reminiscent of that a little bit. We have these planaria, right? So flatworm, it's got a head, it's got a tail. Typically, extremely reliable. You cut it into pieces, every piece grows one head, one tail. We've made two different strains of planaria that are not normal, and these are the only, there are no genetically different strains of planaria, but there are two that are abnormal, and these are not genetic. One is the thing that people have heard of, which is the two-headed version. So every time you cut it, the piece makes heads on both ends like this. But we made another one, and this other one has an interesting property. It is we've described it as a perceptual bistability, meaning that when you cut it into pieces, each piece makes basically tosses a biased coin as to whether it's going to be one-headed or two-headed. It's a destabilized kind of pattern where it can't quite decide, should I be one-headed or two? And the cool thing is that when you take a worm, where you cut it into pieces, each piece makes an independent decision. So two neighboring pieces, one might decide to make one head, one might decide to make two heads, even though they came from the same parent worm. So the individual pieces are not coordinated, but the cells within each piece are coordinated. So you never get a speckled piece where half the cells have decided they're a tail and the other half head. That never happens. Every piece is completely in agreement within the piece of what it's going to do, but the different pieces are in fact stochastic. And we know how to identify the fact by looking at the bioelectrics, how to identify the fact that this worm is one of these. We call them cryptic because for the longest time we didn't realize what was wrong with them. We know how to identify that worm is a cryptic worm, but what we don't know how to do is to look at it and tell you, oh yeah, that piece is going to be two-headed and this piece is going to be one-headed. We don't know yet what underlies that decision, and it's almost like because they're coherent within a worm, and then you have this you cut it into pieces and you have this undetermined state, and eventually they decide, and it takes about 4 hours after you cut for them to decide. But then they pick one or the other, and they've sort of collapsed, and then that's it. Then it's definitively one or the other. So they go through this and again, I'm not claiming that this is as a quantum process underneath, but it does have this interesting property that it's definitive. Then it goes through this undetermined kind of state, and then it's defined again. I don't know if that helps at all, but there are phenomena like that.
I just wanted to ask Bernardo, does he know of ways to derive same equations as Schrodinger equation without necessarily being fundamentally quantum? I think if there are processes that do this, you can just use classical systems, and they're going to act in superposition state. They're going to behave in the same way, and they're going to backpropagate their boundary conditions to smaller and smaller layers, and they get them to act in very strange behaviors. But for me, for example, the planaria really does behave like a hologram. If you have a holographic plate, you cut it, you shine light on it, the hologram is still there. It's restored completely. So it's encoded in the phase of some wave function somewhere, and there's a potential that forces the system by hook or crook to restore it. So that was the idea that I had, basically.
Have you ever sorry, just one quick thing. Have you ever seen the book Shuffle Brain? If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a very interesting book, and half of it is about memory and brain regeneration experiments in salamanders, and the other half is about a holographic theory of memory. So
okay, thank you.
There is an isomorphism. There is a correspondence of form there, if I understand you, between the form of Schrodinger's equation and a model of the frequency spectrum of an EEG. Yes. I understand that. I think you have to be careful applying qualifiers such as quantum or it's a wave function. It's not. There is a correspondence of form, but a wave function is a distribution of probabilities in a system, in a superposition, and the frequency spectrum of an EEG is not that. So I would be careful how you apply the words, but that there is a correspondence of form between systems that are essentially completely different and which are modeled in independent ways. I think that is interesting. But I didn't hear you offering an account for why there is such a correspondence of form, why there is such an isomorphism. And I think that is interesting, that points a direction where maybe some productive work could be done. And the hypothesis is that this isomorphism is not by mere chance, that there is something in the underlying organizing principles that leads to this correspondence of form into completely different systems, even though the equations in question, they may be the same form-wise, but their meaning is totally different. The meaning of a wave equation is not the meaning of an equation that models the frequency spectrum of an EEG, but yet they have the same form. And if the hypothesis is it's not by chance, then why do they have the same form? And I think that could be an interesting avenue to pursue. But I would be very cautious about saying, well, it is a wave function or it is a quantum state. No, it's not. But it has a correspondence of form, and that is interesting indeed.
Yes, I
If you
agree.
can
It
keep
also
your
has a
response brief, Anas, you just got 1 more minute on this. But yeah, go for it. Just brief
Yes,
response if you have one.
I just wanted to say that, yes, the correspondence may be that at the Planck scale, space is discretized. So you may have to go through that same process to generate quantum mechanics. But that's another whole different idea in physics.
It is not entirely clear that space is discrete at the quantum scale. It means the only thing is that our models break down. You can start having micro black holes. We don't know what's happening, but the Planck scale for space and for time does not necessarily mean that space and time are discretizable. This is an error that I hear often. The jury is still out on that. We don't know that. It's just that we can't model anything below that scale.
Thank you so much, Anas. Great contribution. And thank you again, Bernardo and Michael, for very generous responses. So my role, as much as I dislike it, is to always move things along, as much as I much prefer letting people go down very deep into rabbit holes. The structure of tonight is such that we will now invite Jason, if you're here and you want to read your question on self-reflective consciousness as a causal force in evolution.
Hi. Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. You guys are both heroes of mine. I'm really happy to see you together. I was really happy to see you guys meet for the first time, I think, last year, because I've been listening to both of you talk for many years separately, and I really thought there was a magic here when you two got together. So thanks for spreading the good word around the world.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
My question is about how the nature of consciousness might direct evolution. From the base level of conscious being, like I am, that translates in living creatures to subjective experience and the will to survive, to higher forms of consciousness, I know, that manifests as self-awareness and more evolved life. There's a longer version of the question, but I'd rather hear you guys kind of reflect on this than to read the whole question. Basically, I'm wondering what other qualities of consciousness or mind at large are influencing our evolution. Because when I've heard Bernardo respond to this question in particular, often it's kind of just summed up as another result of physical evolution, of evolutionary processes that we understand in biology. But to me, there's another influence here besides just physical fitness in a biological sense. We seem to be driven by other forces, moral forces. We seem to want to redefine our instincts in different terms, to label, killing for food as murder. I remember when I was young, I saw a documentary where young lions set out for the first time to find their way in the world, and they came across another pride. And the first thing they did was kill the leader of that pride, another male lion who's older and outnumbered. Then they went through the pride and found all the cubs and killed all the cubs, all the young offspring of that male lion. And then they mated with all the females, right? And when I saw this as I was young, there was a reaction in my gut that said, this is wrong, right? It's kind of horrible to see cubs killed. But at the same time, I knew that wasn't really wrong. Like, it's not right to call it murder and infanticide and rape. We've redefined those terms, right? We've imposed those moral judgments on these natural processes. So there's an obvious influence on humanity that is pulling us in a different direction than just our natural behavior. Where is that coming from? To me, it must be part of the nature of consciousness. And so I wonder what we can understand about consciousness through that idea. And also, if we can look at this as another form of direction, like another evolutionary pressure that is more of a revelation of what consciousness is rather than just an evolution of physical forces.
You want to give it a first shot, Michael?
Okay. All right. Let's see. I can say something a little more certain, and then something that is total speculation. The more certain thing and the more conventional thing, if we step back for a moment from consciousness and we look at intelligence, what we have studied is an interesting effect of intelligence on the course of evolution. And what I mean by that is the standard model is that you have your genetic material. That genetic material is the target of mutations. Then you have your phenotype, which is the actions that the system can take in the world, and that is what selection acts on, right? You're either to some extent more or less adaptive, and you either die or not. The mapping between the genotype and the phenotype in the standard story of this is it's complex, it's very tangled, it's pleiotropic, it's redundant, it's degenerate. There's all these things that make it complicated, but it's just it's just complexity. It turns out that if you look at the implications for evolution of the thing that we've been studying for a long time, and other people have as well, which is that mapping is not just a complicated but straightforward mechanical mapping. It's actually that process itself is intelligent, meaning that what you have is a system that is doing its best to interpret the information that it has from the genome and also from other sources, and it's a problem-solving process. It is not a low-level mechanics. It's actually an active reinterpretation, semiotic problem-solving process whereby this thing is trying to do the best it can with whatever it's been given. Once you do that, the course of evolution, and we have lots of simulations studying this, and if you want, I'll send you a couple of papers. Evolution itself actually acts quite differently. So it is not the same. Evolving over an agential material like that is actually not at all like evolving over a passive sort of mapping, and we've compared them head to head and so on. So I think one of the things that it implements is this kind of intelligence ratchet, where at the very lowest level, when you first have that mapping, which is able to not just directly do whatever the genome means, but says, but actually to improve the situation as best as it can. The tiniest amount of that starts you off on a positive feedback loop, which actually ends up growing that, so that eventually you start expanding that intelligence. You run it through metabolic space, physiological space, transcriptional space, anatomical space. Then you get to the thing that we're most most primed to recognize, which is intelligent behavior in three-dimensional space. That's what we normally see as behavior. And who knows, linguistic space after that, maybe who knows what happens after that. But so there's definitely a link to intelligence per se. Probably you want to hear about consciousness as opposed to intelligence. And I don't have anything definitive to say other than I'm similar to Bernardo in that I don't think any kind of a physicalist story is going to do the trick here. And I think that to the extent that evolution, the one thing I think is pretty clear is that evolution makes enormous use of free lunches that come from this Platonic space of facts, of mathematics, of computation, and so on, that are not defined by physical features in this physical world. So there's that. But also, if we make the leap, and this is something that I go over in this preprint that I just put out a couple of days ago, it's total speculation. But if you also make the leap that those patterns that are available, some of them are very low agency things like facts about prime numbers and logic gates and things like that, but that others are actually patterns of competencies and patterns of behavior, which you might call kinds of minds, meaning that these patterns are distributed on a spectrum from very boring low agency things, things about triangles and whatnot, all the way up to what we recognize as kind of minds. If that's the case, and evolution is basically what evolution basically creates are interfaces or pointers through which those patterns appear to act in the physical world. then I could easily see that those patterns are not just passively sitting there waiting to be picked up, but are actually under some kind of pressure to express themselves in the world. And thus there might be some sort of dynamic where by building continuously more capable pointers into that space, you allow more and more high-end patterns to sort of filter through. So you could imagine then putting those things together, right? The intelligence ratchet that we found together with this completely speculative thing about high order forms. I can see what you're suggesting, that maybe that loop maybe actually is not a random trial and error loop, but actually is driven some sort of pressure from these patterns.
Thank you.
I can talk around it a little bit. It's not really my area of expertise, but I'll say a couple of things, and I'm sure you will know how to apply them to your idea. Under neo-Darwinism, the mutations that underlie evolution by natural selection are meant to be completely random, unbiased. Evolution by natural selection itself is, of course, not random. It is biased towards fitness. That's the point. But the mutations that the origin of it are meant to be random. To the extent that this has any meaning, because to say that something is random is an epistemic statement. You're basically saying, I don't know what the causes are. Right? That's all it means. So to the extent that there is any meaning to stating that the mutations themselves are random or unbiased, the question that arises is, how do we check one way or the other? Well, if the fossil record would be complete enough that we would have a dense enough sampling of all genetic mutations that have occurred for the past 4 billion years, including the mutations that were not affixed by natural selection because they didn't lead to higher fitness, we could do a randomness test, which is a computer thing. You can run a randomness test and see if the original mutations were random or not. But that is completely impossible because the fossil record is so sparsely sampled. So there is no positive evidence that the mutations are random. Recent studies have shown that at least in some cases they are not. There is a study done in Israel a few years ago that genetic mutations associated with our immune response to malaria infection, they occur more frequently in places that suffer from malaria, where malaria is present, and not in places where there is no malaria. So apparently the mutations themselves are biased. And it raises the question, what is the mechanism of the bias? What is the feedback system that links phenotypical expression all the way down to genotypical mutations? And then, if we are amongst friends, we can start speculating about quantum entanglement and consciousness. As an analytic idealist, I think consciousness is all there is. So whatever this feedback mechanism is, it is consciousness related. But I don't think it is necessarily metacognitive. I don't think that our metacognitive moral judgment, which is the only moral judgment we can make, it's metacognitive. There is no spontaneous moral judgment. Below metacognition, there is no value judgment. It's just what is. I don't think our metacognitive value judgments are necessarily involved. Actually, I don't think they are involved at all. Of course, there is not enough data to make a call either way because we have been metacognitive for 30 to 50,000 years. That is absolutely nothing in the scale of evolution. So no, I cannot even say there is no evidence for it because it would be a statement without any meaning. Of course, there is no evidence for it. There has not been enough elapsed time to know whether our value judgments, our morals, are leading to the birth of more ethical people. We cannot know. But if you ask me, if I had to make a bet, I would bet no. The link doesn't happen at the level of metacognition. It happens at some more autonomous levels. In other words, bodies or organisms somehow know what it takes to survive instinctively, spontaneously. And that creates some feedback mechanism elsewhere. It's not necessarily our moral discernment. Having said all this, I do think we carry the responsibility, the ethical responsibility for moral discernment. So I think it is okay, not only okay, it's required for human beings, which are the only metacognitive eyes of nature, We are part of nature. We are not separate from everything else. But we are the part of nature that can perform that function. Nothing else can. The lions can't. My cat cannot. The amoeba in your toilet cannot. But we can. So I think it is proper for us to say, even amongst the lions, infanticide is not okay. You can't blame the lion for doing it. You can't do that because you know that the lion does not have the higher level cognitive capacity for value judgment. But we do. So I think it is okay for us to say that is not okay. And if we were the architect of nature, that is something we should change. Because why will the mind of nature torture itself unnecessarily like that? There are better ways to do things. And I think I think it is okay for us to pass that value judgment so long as we don't blame the lion.
And we do pass some kind of a transformative effect when we raise animals from cubs, right? Like even lions, when they're raised by humans, their nature changes, right? They still play with their instincts, but they're not compelled by them. They don't have to kill anymore.
But you can read the other way around. You can breed pit bulls that can only fight. That's all they know how to do.
Right. But I guess what I'm really asking is like, where is that impulse coming from that makes us more human and less animal? Like, where is that directive coming from? Can we say it's part of the nature of consciousness? And are we still evolving? Or is there some new term for what's happening to us in this transformation from animal to human?
I think the greatest mystery, I mean, Michael can comment on it much better than me. The greatest mystery in the history of life is the emergence of metacognition and symbolic thinking that sort of comes with it hand in hand. There is this book by Ian Tattersall, from the curator of the Hall of Human History of the American Museum of Natural History. He's retired now, I think. If not, he's working until old age. He must be very old now. But he wrote this book in 2012 called Masters of the Planet. And there is a very impressive passage of it that sort of shook me, where he says, the absolutely only reason we have to believe that such a jump from mere consciousness to metacognition or symbolic thinking could ever have happened, the only reason we have to think that it could be possible at all is that it obviously happened. Because otherwise we would have absolutely no reason whatsoever to entertain such a preposterous hypothesis. Why would that have ever happened? Well, it did happen, right? So we may not understand how, or we may not have developed an intuition for grasping why it was a natural thing to happen, but it did happen. It is a mystery. That is a great mystery. But my intuition is that this feedback loop that biases the genetic mutations at the root of evolution doesn't entail these higher level value judgment capacities. I think that it's too high level to but that's I can't defend that either way to you. It's just.
But can we say that it happened because it's part of the nature
one last brief
of
comment, if that's
consciousness?
okay, Jason. Just one last brief comment, if that's okay, because we're out of time for this.
Sure.
Well,
I'm just wondering if we can say it happened because it is what the nature of consciousness is. Like,
well, it's clearly part of the inherent potentials of consciousness that it could become metaconscious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So by definition, it was part of the potentialities. But it's difficult to see anything in the raw play of evolution by natural selection that would have required it, especially because we have every reason to believe that the mutation happened together with the other anatomic mutations that characterize modern humans. That's about 300,000 years ago, but it lay dormant without being used for 250,000 years. And yet it was affixed, it was not lost. In other words, it evolved apparently for absolutely no reason and lay dormant for 250,000 years. I mean, this is mind-boggling stuff. So, of course, it was part of the potentials, but how exactly that potential was triggered is unclear.
thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Great question. Thanks again for your responses. Sorry, I'm just looking to see how to, remove spotlight. So yeah, thank you so much. Next idea is submitted by Ryan. The request was for it to be read by me. Ryan, if you're here and you change your mind, feel free, but I'll do my best here. Starts with three broad questions. What is the foundation of math and physics? What consequences arises when this foundation is realized? And what is the nature of existence? And by the way, I've put this in the chat if that's easier.
Easy questions, no problem.
Oh yeah, I know.
So these are the
Wow.
warm-up questions. I think these are the questions that his approach aims to address. I've put it in writing in the chat in case it's easier to read than hear me read them. He says, the most prudent approach to solving these questions will inherently solve well-known problems presently occurring in canonical paradigms, e.g. structural and philosophical thinking of mathematics, quantum thermodynamics, quantum chemistry, quantum scarring, deformation theory, etc. The orthodoxies of these formal systems stem from historical events dating back to ancient Greece, Hilbert's program, and cohomology. The frontier that exists before us involves analyzing the evolution of these events and how they shape our perceptions between abstractness and realness. Ultimately, the solution will output useful predictions, but most importantly, give us insights into how physical systems emerge into the nature of being in a rigorous way. I claim to have begun the path forward to answer many of these questions, including a new mathematical object known as the unadulterated representation of pi. If I'm correct, this will lead to new tools in computing quantum systems and how they emerge into observables. If I'm wrong, I will correct where it is wrong and seek to reformulate these foundations as necessary. To reach these error corrections will require both parties to understand what is being proposed before dismissing based on one's formal training. So I wasn't sure if there was enough there for you to both respond to, so I emailed Ryan, and there's more, but perhaps I'll just pause there to see if you have an initial response.
Michael, want to give it a go?
Well, I guess I would like to hear more about what it is. I'm not sure I can say anything yet, other than that first question. What is the foundation? I'm not sure what a good answer to that question would look like. It seems like that's the kind of thing when somebody formulates an answer to what the foundation is, somebody else will say, yeah, but why is that the way it is? So I think we need to know, are we okay with some sort of infinite regress where we just keep peeling, sort of this infinite onion and that's fine? Or is there some sort of answer being envisioned that the claim is that when we see that answer, everybody's going to say, oh yeah, well, of course it had to be that, no more, no more questions, right? So I just want to know what, because I feel like in especially in these kind of areas, we often ask questions and then argue about it without a good agreement on what an answer would look like that everybody, not what the answer is, but what would it look like that everybody would be happy with that okay, now it's solved. I'm not sure what that would even be.
Yeah, I share Michael's feeling, because the questioner, he lays down the context, but he doesn't say then what his solution is. So we can't comment on his theory because he doesn't say what it is. I can only comment briefly on two things around it. One is we can do physics without any theory or hypothesis regarding why our models work, why our logic and our mathematics seem to describe the regularities of nature so well. We don't need to have that hypothesis in order to model nature correctly and make predictions that work. But of course, there is the Wigner's mystery, the miracle. He calls it a miracle in his 1960 paper. Why does our mathematics, the things that are intuitively self-evident to us, happen to work so well in modeling nature? Why the hell is that the case? I mean, there is nothing etched in stone in nature requiring the intuitions of an ape to have this enormous capacity for modeling the objective world out there. Why does that happen? My own feeling, my own account for this would be that, well, nature too is mental, just like we are mental. Nature's body is material, the physical world, just like our own body is material. In other words, materiality is the appearance of mental processes in all cases, without exception. And because it's only one mind, the archetypes, the organizing principles, the fundamental organizing principles that underlie the dynamics of nature are the same fundamental organizing principles that give the ape's intuitions. What is self-evident to the ape holds in nature because it's the same archetypes operating here and there. And that would be my answer to Wigner's miracle. But I don't know what the question or hypothesis is.
So I followed up in the chat in what he emailed me, which is a new mathematical object and its reasons for computational application. It might be easier if you read it, if you're okay with that. And there's a picture in the chat as well of this mathematical object, which obviously I can't read.
Yeah, there's too little here, and this would require basically peer review. It's talking about number series arithmetics. Now, I don't think I can make any judgment just by looking at it like this.
Sure, it's not the right format.
He's looking for some
Feedback.
fundamental geometrical archetype. That much I can discern, but it's difficult to go any further than this.
Yeah, the only thing similarly, I don't think I can say anything specific here, but just to kind of riff off of what Bernardo was just saying, and by the way, I agree completely. But I think that is why, right, mathematics is effective. But it is interesting to think about the devil's advocate position, which is that how effective is it? Like, it looks effective because we've been able to do some things, but actually, there's also an incredible amount of things that we haven't been able to do, and one wonders if our cognitive architecture was completely different, if we were, I don't know, some crazy, giant cloud of something and right in between the galaxies, just a completely different architecture with very different math. Maybe then we could do way more, right? That what could imagine that everything that we've done so far is some sort of epicycle still plugged onto the one thing that our ape brain can sort of wrap itself around, and that things look to us like they're working, but we're basically picking the low hanging fruit, and that some of the sort of no-go theorems that we find, in terms of like Gödel lenses, speed of light, and all these other things, who knows if that's right, if that's really not just relative to our own whatever we can. I don't know. I think that's fun to think about. I don't think it's right, but I think it's fun to think about.
So let me just chime in here. I agree with Bernardo. I was very hesitant to even make a post about.
Are you the questioner? Oh, great, right.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, I am.
I'll just spotlight you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So I've been meaning to publish this for peer review, and I don't really like talking about it unless it's finished because there's so many details to get wrong. But the point that I'm getting to is that just like what we saw with Newtonian physics and Einstein's physics, is that when you mathematically model something a little bit differently, you can get interesting experimental predictions. So and I'll just cut to the chase, maybe to stay on topic to everyone's discussions here, is that one of the experimental predictions I'm seeing is that let's go into the genetic mutations, that the seemingly randomness of genetic mutations may be caused by biophotons, where the emission profile may have change the probability of how an interaction occurs. And so a physical example of this would be, so in my line of work, I work on lasers and photolithography, and there's a phenomenon called injection locking. Injection locking is where we take a laser and we get a line width of one emission spectrum. Let's say it's like the color red, and we put that color red into another laser, and then it injects that laser then emits that line width without having to use other devices to obtain that emission spectrum. So the exposure of a specific emission profile changes the chemical reaction of a laser. So if we could, I'm just thinking here based on this experimental evidence that we use already, in photolithography in chip manufacturing, that it may have some kind of alteration in the probability of how a chemical reaction occurs in genetic mutation.
Are you in San Diego?
San Diego? No.
Cymer? No.
Gigaphoton.
Oh, you're a gigaphoton. Okay. I recognize where you're coming from. It's an interesting idea.
So, and I mean, there's a lot of details to discuss. I have a hard time remembering. I've been researching this for 10 years, but if anyone wanted to follow up, I can certainly give more details and what the research suggests. But basically, another method would be changing, or another computational tool to not use complex numbers. And it would change the ontological meaning of what a number means, and non-linearity. And I know you were seeing that I was giving a geometric kind of
representation
method. Yeah, representation. But this and this is just, I'm just scratching the surface here. What this is it's a non-stable field. It's a Hilbert space, and the local structure of the Hilbert space is dependent upon the non-local interference. And so you basically have to model emergence and how the variation of that emergent profile will change its emission spectrum. Like and we see this in, like, basically it's just try to model the interdependency of systems, and how those certain emergent profiles change the other local fields and so on. So it's difficult to talk about off cuff, but it's
almost impossible to be able to judge based on such a short interaction. But I think I can sense the flavor of where you're coming from. It is interesting. It would be part of complexity science.
Yes. So it is. It is getting, and basically the solution here. And you're familiar with quantum thermodynamics, where they use two different models. And so what I'm aiming here is to reduce computational complexity, such as trying to model thermodynamics, because when you're trying to understand emergence, like temperature doesn't arise until you're around like 10,000 particles. So certain questions don't make sense at a certain amount of
scale.
Scale, exactly. So in order to overcome that, we must find a computationally efficient model that can emerge to scale.
I get the gist of it. I can't give you any meaningful feedback based on so little exposure, but I don't hear anything incoherent.
Unfortunately, Ryan,
thank you. I mean,
we're running out of time on this one. Do you want to give one last brief response?
No, silence is golden.
Thanks, Ryan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for presenting that. I think we'll probably have time for one more question, maximum two, depending on how this one goes. It's submitted by Matthew. There's a generous donation to accompany it, so thank you for that. Maybe I'll just spotlight myself because he's asked me to read it. And again, but if you're here, it's always a pleasure for people to read their own questions, but I'll try and serve it as best I can. You're both doing okay, Michael and Bernardo? You're no bio break need or anything? Great.
No, I'm good to go.
Here we go.
So this is a slightly different flavored question. It says, in Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, we are reminded how new tools, telescope, microscope, went hand in hand with new... Sorry, I've moved my screen. Went hand in hand with new conceptual ideas to cause paradigm shifts in scientific understanding. often against harsh resistance. It seems logical that much more science funding should be directed towards fringe science and controversial ideas, as well as giving our best thought leaders more say in where funding goes, in hopes of finding that one anomalous result that sets off a paradigm shift. Even if most ideas fail, it would be worth one novel breakthrough, and a failure may result in a new tool that is used in a novel way to make a breakthrough. What are your thoughts on creating the necessary conditions to make major scientific breakthroughs?
Yeah, I mean, great. Obviously a key question. I mean, one thing that we don't know, and I'm not going to pretend I know what the number is. If you're any kind of a society with a fixed budget that you can spend on research, what percent of that budget should be spent on things that the conventional reviewers find ridiculous? So, it certainly isn't zero. It certainly isn't 100%, but somewhere in there, there's a number that over the long term makes sense. I don't know what that number is. I mean, the problem with that kind of idea is that where it always falls down is in the reviewers. Because what happens is, so this happens all the time. People across NIH, DARPA, NASA, you name it. Every once in a while, they will put out this call. We're looking for wild, out of the box ideas. Send us your weirdest stuff. Okay, so you send them something like that, then they need to get it reviewed. Well, what are they going to do? They pick some reviewers, and either one of two things will happen. Either they will get standard run-of-the-mill reviewers, or they will get unconventional thinkers. But the problem is that most unconventional thinkers love their own unconventional idea. They don't necessarily love your unconventional idea. And in fact, they may have expended so much mental energy on battling for their idea, they have zero energy left for yours. They just want everybody, what they would like is for all the other unconventional stuff to cool it, so that they can, everything else is settled, and now there's this one thing that they're going to grind their axe on. So finding reviewers that can review unconventional ideas is really hard, because by definition, yeah, and I learned this early on, trying to send my stuff to people in the field who I knew were unconventional thinkers, and I realized they were the worst critics, because they have zero interest in anybody else's. It just takes attention away from what they're trying to do, and they were just like, stop it, that's crazy. Now here's something that we have something. So anyway, so you get these reviewers, and they look at this stuff and they say, there is no way that this is correct. Total waste of money. Now what do you do? Right? Because you can't, how much money do you want to spend on things? Because let's face it, most of those things are a waste of money. And so, right. And so there is no algorithm. We don't have a good way of choosing that. It's like the old joke, somebody asked the book publisher, why don't you only publish the bestsellers? Why are you publishing all this other stuff? And that's, you're right. And it's the same, it's the same joke until you try it and you find out 10 years later that, oh my God, this completely ridiculous thing led to all this interesting stuff. But by the way, these other 99 things went absolutely nowhere, but you don't know that ahead of time. So it's really hard, and it's, different places have different philosophies on this. So my understanding, and I'm not in that system, but I'm in the US, but in the UK system, they don't so much fund the project, they fund the person, right? So it's a lot more focused on, well, what have you done before? But of course, that's a feedback loop, because when you're new, if you don't get the money to start with, well, you haven't done anything before, right? So, and then in the US, it's all about the project. And the problem with that is too, no matter how many things you've done before, they're gonna look at the project, and if they don't get it, what they say is, well, okay, the last 10 things you did, those worked out great, but this one definitely isn't going to work, right? So either way, right, there is no, I don't think there's any perfect solution to this. I think as a society, we need to first, and this is already a hard ask, at least in the US, it is to commit to the idea that research, that basic research period is useful, and that it feeds all the other things we like, the economic progress and medicine and whatever. And then within that, once you've committed to that, then you've got a further question of, let's all agree on what the number, what's the percentage of craziness that you want to tolerate? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 30%? I don't know. So that's all I have to say. I don't know what the right number is, but it's a deep unsolved problem.
have thought long about it, and Michael covered most of it. There is only one small thing I might add. For as long as there is state competition in the world, for as long as Japan is trying to beat China, who is trying to beat the US, and then Europe is trying to beat somebody else, for as long as there is this geopolitical level competition, resources will go only on very practically applicable things on relatively short term that will benefit a country's geopolitical standing and economic position. To be able to dedicate resources to freewheeling ideas that are unlikely to be true, but that have an incredibly high potential to change lives, to change civilization if they are true, that I think that will only happen at scale when, well, there is world peace, when that drive towards competition is at least a little soothed, when we find ourselves at a global situation where we feel secure where we are. We don't feel that we need to compete, that we need to fight, that we need to win, and that we are focusing on improving ourselves and how we live life and how we relate to the world. We are still far away from that.
Great. Thank you both so much for those perspectives. Looks like we have got time to get your thoughts on at least one more thing. It's another very big question, but it's wonderful to hear your thoughts on these things. Why does war exist? Kate submitted this. Don't know if you're here, Kate. Feel free to unmute if you are, but I'll go ahead and read it. Levin's research into the boundaries of interacting selves at a small scale seem relevant to a much larger problem impacting us all. Why can't our species eradicate this particularly destructive feedback loop that emerges on every level of human interaction, wherever it occurs on the spectrum between abuse to war? Abuse is extremely common, persistent, self-replicating pattern of interaction in which one individual projects undesired parts of themselves onto another, then attacks that part, using the other as a proxy. Reality is distorted. The boundary between self and other is simultaneously collapsed and expanded in rigid ways that is very difficult to interrupt. The exact same dynamic that appears in microcosm form between individuals appears at the scale of nation-states in the form of war. Its ability to self-replicate is astonishing and at the heart of some of the worst suffering humans experience. Human malware. Perhaps achieving world peace is similar to building a global individuated self. How might this relate to Gaia theory or Joshua Bach's cyber animism? Are all minds the sum of an interacting cluster of agents, whether those agents are cells in a single organ, thoughts in a single human mind, or individuals in a single culture? Does some form of ego development exist at every level of self? What role might LLMs play in facilitating a global individuation process for a planet-sized self by condensing many zeitgeists? Might the existence of synchronicity suggest that such a self is already a work in progress? Would gods be involved in the establishing or maintenance of such a self?
And maybe give it a quick shot first, Michael, because I do have a hard stop at 9:30. Maybe you can continue a little longer. I don't know.
Sure, go for it.
I don't think it is possible that human beings may become cells in a super global scale organism. I don't think that's how it works. I think our dissociative boundaries are actively enforced because that's what fitness is in evolution. We are fit if we actively reinforce our dissociative boundaries. So I don't see any natural mechanism. I think Michael will diverge from me here, but I personally don't see any viable natural mechanism that would allow our individuality to be subsumed in some kind of global level individuality, like the individuality of China or the individuality of humans on Earth. I think we have no reason to think that that is possible. I would go as far as to say I don't think that that is desirable, because I think the currency of nature's wealth is individual differences. It is the different ways in which nature tries to express itself through you, through me, through Michael, through Amir, through my cat. That is the currents of nature's richness. If you subsume everybody into one perspective, I think there is a lot to lose. And I don't think this kind of integration is required for world peace. I think we can achieve world peace just by vanilla maturation, by becoming mature adults. Unfortunately, there are a lot of psychically unbalanced teenagers in their 70s and 80s out there, and in their 50s, in every age group. And we pay the price for being a very young, immature species who has been thinking with an intellect only for, at best 50,000 years. So I don't think Bach's theory holds any water whatsoever. I think it's pure fantasy. It's, if you forgive me, I think it's complete nonsense. It's pure fantasizing from the mind of a computer scientist who doesn't have a philosophy background, doesn't have a neuroscience background, doesn't have an engineering background, and I don't think it's required. I think we can do well through vanilla cooperation, maturity, and sound ethics.
Yeah, let's see, a couple of things. Well, I actually do think it's possible, but like Bernardo, I don't think it's a good idea at all. There's no guarantee that any collective intelligence that you cobble together from competent parts is going to be of a higher grade of intelligence than what you started with. I mean, biology tends to like to do that, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. And B, there's also zero guarantee that, in fact, probably some pressure against it, that the collective is going to care about the welfare of the individual pieces. And so this has actually been tried, of course, numerous times in human societies. It always ends the same way. I don't have to describe what that is. It's terrible. So I don't think that is the way to go at all. The only thing, and it's beyond my pay grade to say how to do it, but I do have one thought that I would be interested to know how this would work out. One could argue that a lot of the dynamics that we drive as humans have been developed going all the way back to the beginning of life under a scarcity paradigm. That is, from the very earliest time that you're the first microbe. There's competition. There's limited time, limited food, limited resources. You've got to eat somebody before they eat you, and that kind of a thing, one could argue, has scaled up. Now, what I would wonder is what's going to happen if and when. So let's say we crack we crack free energy, right? And so the cost of energy becomes zero. You can have as much energy as you want, and anybody can. We can, if you have unlimited energy, you pretty much have unlimited stuff. You can make almost everything. In that case, how long would it take, having broken this scarcity mentality? How many generations of growing up in a world where possessions mean nothing because anyone can have whatever they want? How many generations of that before we change enough so that the kinds of things that are drivers today become completely irrelevant? I don't know, and I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that would require some sort of massive redesign of our brain architecture, or maybe not. Maybe it's it can be fixed at the sort of firmware level that if you're raised in an environment where it just doesn't make any sense to accumulate things or to take anybody else's things because things are worthless. The marginal cost is almost zero. What would happen then? Would that kind of thing have a massive implication for how we relate to each other on a global scale and also on a personal scale. And I don't think it's impossible. I think it's a viable, I don't think there's any guarantee it'll happen, but I think it's a viable future if we don't manage to kill ourselves first. I think there is a path to a mature humanity where we've cracked the energy problem so completely that most of the things that drive the scarcity and the zero-sum mentality that drives a lot of these problems goes away. And then I don't know what happens after that, but it may be a solution to this kind of thing, maybe.
Brilliant. Thank you for that question. I don't know if, Michael, you can stay a couple more minutes on, or we should just all close together.
I have a couple minutes. I have a hard stop in 6 minutes, but I'm here until then.
Oh, okay.
Can I just react to my discussion of my topic because there wasn't time?
Sure, if it's a brief comment, go for it.
Yeah, because I'm aware that there's no information transfer in quantum entanglement, and that it's like functioning as one thing. So that's why I was talking about functioning as a collective. So my theory is that we extract information from that connection, not that it's transferred from the planet to us or something. So that was.
I think that makes sense. I think the apparent variety of nature is an artifact of our cognition. It's an artifact of what Schopenhauer called representation, and that the will, the noumenal behind the apparently fragmented phenomenon is holistic, is unified. It's only one thing, and we are that. We rise from that. We are part of that. So everything that there is in that, and therefore it's in some way, you could call it a holographic way. In some way, it is in us too. So yes, from that perspective, yes, there could be the same organizing principles playing out at the level of the solar system as the organizing principles that's playing out at the level of human lives.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annemiek. And so what I think I'll do for this last question is just share my screen so you can glance at it. And if you've got a parting kind of gut reaction comment as you leave, Bernardo, you can. And then similarly, Michael, so we can finish on time. But just also express my gratitude, and on behalf of everyone here, and probably you were listening to the questions I didn't see in the chat, there's a lot of gratitude expressed in the chat for you giving your time. Obviously, hope everyone realizes all the money that was raised goes directly to compassion and world farming. Bernardo and Michael are not getting paid for their time that they're giving to do this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed sharing your ideas, hearing each other's ideas, and knowing that everyone that we didn't get a chance to get to your ideas, that your money is hopefully going to relieving suffering of other beings. And perhaps we'll do this again. So yeah, I've got no idea how useful this is going to be. Just sharing this. It has some resonances, Michael, with some of your thinking, I think.
Yeah, I'll say goodbye to you guys now, because I do need a bio break before I get to my next
starting
call.
the next meeting. Yeah, thank
you,
you so
Bernardo.
much.
It's great to see you again.
It was a pleasure.
Great.
Good seeing you, Michael. Thanks, Amir. Thanks, everybody.
See you very soon,
Thank
Bernardo.
you very
Bye.
much.
Is this helpful, Michael?
Yeah, I'm reading and I'm trying to understand the question. I mean, so far it seems right. Yeah, I don't know if the person who wrote this is on, but I guess the question is, I mean, this seems like the recognition of the hierarchical organization of nature seems very plausible. Yeah, I guess maybe scroll down to see if there's a specific question or something. Keep going.
The summary's done. The summary's just here.
Yeah. There's not much to argue with there. It seems, unless I'm missing something, it seems like a reasonable summary of what we see.
Okay, great. So yeah, apologies, Daniel. There wasn't time to have a fuller discussion on this. We'll put your presentation in the chat if anyone wants to follow up on it. And again, Michael, thank you for being the inspiration for these.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this is great, and thank you everybody for your participation, your questions.
Sorry, carry on, Michael.
Yeah, that's all. I was just saying that thank you to everybody for supporting the cause and for being here to talk with us. It's great. Yeah.
Great. Hopefully we'll have another forum or format or Q&A in the future. Thanks again, Michael.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
See you. Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. We now run a weekly membership program with Bernardo Kastrup that you can join at withrealityinmind.com. This includes weekly Q&As, special guests like Rupert Spira, Michael Levin, Federico Fagin. There's an international, vibrant community of researchers, academics, meditators, mystics, philosophers, poets, creatives, musicians, anyone that wants to deeply understand this philosophy and its potential implications for their lives. In this next clip, Bernardo explains his motivation for wanting to start this program, which include helping anyone that wants to deeply understand this, but also helping anyone that wants to become an ambassador for idealism.
For me, personally, helping create not only a community, I'm not trying to do activism here, I'm not trying to build an army of analytic idealists, but creating a community in which a deeper understanding of idealism in general, perhaps analytic idealism in particular, because that's what I can offer more, but a community around idealism that truly and deeply understands what it is, more than the average person who has heard about analytic idealism. I'm still getting today, after 15 years, mostly the same questions I used to get in year one. So progress in the world at large is very slow, but within a sort of a nurtured community, I think we can achieve a lot more and go a lot more in depth. And to use a word I used with Amir when we were discussing this, I don't know whether it's a goal or just a wish, so I'll keep it as a wish. I would like to help foment a community of ambassadors of idealism, people who will be equipped to go out into their communities, go into the world, and not preach analytic idealism, but when the subject comes up, they will be a sort of a source of light, an informed source of clarifications, of arguments, of reason, basically, a source of reason in their communities. And maybe that starts something that grows organically. By nature, I'm also a natural introvert. So playing a public role is fairly unnatural to me. It's something I can do because I learned, life forces you very early on to behave like an extrovert in science, in the corporate world, and especially when you're a book writer, you have to put your face out there and talk to people, confront the world. But by nature, I am an introvert. And so, and this may sound a little bit egocentric, maybe it is. It would be nice to have more voices out there, so I could feel more comfortable myself to allow myself to disappear in my Swiss Alps mountain every now and then, knowing that there is a whole group of people out there who are carrying the torch still. So yeah, those were my sincere motivations for this.